This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Best-selling author George Packer explains how organized money is responsible for the unwinding of America. Political strategist Celinda Lake warns that without Obama on the ticket, progressive voters will have to turn out at the polls next year in huge numbers to ensure that the Senate remains Democratic and maybe take back the House too. And Bill Press talks with Congresswoman Barbara Lee about the sequester. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Author George Packer has a best-selling analysis of how America has become unwound as a result of what he calls organized money, spent on behalf of corporations. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, George Packer is a staff writer for The New Yorker and the prize-winning author of several books, novels, and a play. His latest book, which has won universal praise from critics and readers, is The Unwinding, an account of how America's social contract is becoming frayed. George Packer, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
My pleasure.
You know, the subtitle of your book, Unwinding, is An Inner History of the New America. What is the New America, and what's being unwound?
It's a picture of America over the past generation. So the book begins in 1978 and follows the lives of a handful of Americans from different parts of the country and different backgrounds, different classes, races, through the 35 years from 78 to the present. And it also looks at the lives of 10 famous Americans who've shaped the culture of the country during that period. And The Unwinding is a reference to the social structures and institutions that used to support the aspirations of middle-class Americans and of ordinary Americans, like schools and newspapers and government and corporations, going on a social contract, as you mentioned, that involved business, labor, government, and civil society, and that has been shredded in the past generation. So these characters in the book have to navigate the turbulent waters of this period more and more on their own.
Is there a cycle, though, in which every stage of history someone comes along and mourns the passing of old values? Like a Ronald Reagan, perhaps, I think was one of those?
Yeah, I don't think the book is about nostalgia, because obviousobviously there were flagrant injustices in the America of the previous period, which I call the Roosevelt Republic. Millions of Americans were either non-persons or were disenfranchised or in some way thwarted. But I do think that America had the tools to correct those injustices and did so in cases like the Civil Rights Movement. What we see today is the lack of those tools, the lack of institutions that work on behalf of greater equal opportunity and upward mobility. And instead, it's much more of an entrepreneurial society where individuals are forced to rely on luck, talent, and what life brings them without having structures that can aid them in their dreams. And that's the case with all of the characters in the book.
Well, and you write at length about the vast inequalities in America today. Do you think this is a direct result of the Reagan Revolution in American politics?
I think that's part of it. A number of things began to happen right around 1978 when the book begins. At the time, it didn't seem like a particularly important year, but I think in retrospect, that period saw the start of deindustrialization in the Rust Belt, of the rise of the information age in Silicon Valley, the financialization of the economy on Wall Street, the flood of big money into Washington in lobbying, and the rise of the right wing as a political movement that wanted to take the institutions of power one at a time. So we had some forces that were simply blind economic changes like globalization and technological change, but we also had leaders of institutions taking advantage of those changes to rewrite the rules on their own behalf and to write out of the rules more and more people who didn't have the means to fight for themselves. So that unions began to be eroded, and newspapers, regional papers started to fade away. Public education declined, especially in my home state of California. So all of those institutional changes were partly big historical forces and partly bad leaders, changes in social norms, and very much a rise of an ideology that said that government is the problem.
We're speaking with George Packer, staff writer with the New Yorker and the author of the book, The Unwinding, An Inner History of the New America. So the term that you use, organized money, to describe the most powerful force in America today, what are some examples of that, and how does it act to unwind the social contract, or is that kind of what you were just talking about?
Well, one good example from the past, and this goes back to the 70s, is a group called the Business Roundtable, which was a lobby of some of the biggest corporations in America that was created in the mid-70s as a response to things like consumer laws and environmental protection laws, and to foreign competition and the sense that business could no longer afford to sit at the same table and play by a common set of rules with labor and government. And instead, in that year of 78, the Business Roundtable led these lobbying campaigns against a series of bills for labor law reform, consumer law reform, and tax reform, and killed them all, in spite of the fact that a Democrat was in the White House and Democrats controlled both houses of Congress. And that showed that lobbying, done the right way with a massive, all sort of full-court press campaign with a lot of big money behind it, could actually change the way Washington operated, and that set the tone that we now are drearily familiar with today.
Right. The book also seems to say that in today's society and economy, there's too much freedom, and that's why the have-nots are struggling. Can you elaborate on that?
It sounds strange to an American to talk about too much freedom, and I'm not for the government taking it away. I'm for people restraining themselves. And you can look at a number of ways in which those self-restraints slipped loose and led to some of the extremes that we see today, both ideological extremes and also extremes in wealth. For example, in the 70s or in the 60s, a CEO would not have been given a big pay raise for cutting the workforce by 20%. But that's a normal thing today. It's a reward for work well done. Senators used to filibuster when a bill seemed like a matter of life and death. For example, Southern senators against civil rights legislation. Today, the filibuster is used every single day on the floor of the Senate to thwart nominations, to thwart appointments, and to thwart legislation. It's an anti-democratic tool. On the Internet, there's this sense that journalism is becoming more and more the possession of the citizens, and everyone can be a journalist with a Twitter account or with a Facebook page. But in fact, if you can write anything, then rumor and gossip become the news, and that's something we've seen over and over in recent years. So it's not that I'm saying we should claw back freedoms that have been hard-won through long battles. I'm saying that in this age of maximal freedom, we now have to look to individuals to restrain themselves, and there's fewer and fewer reasons to do so, because if the people at the top aren't doing it, then anyone else feels like a sucker for not going for maximum self-interest.
It's funny as you're talking about this, and I'm instantly brought back to being a kid and mom and dad saying, well, when I was a kid, we walked 10 miles. We didn't just sit around on the couch and that kind of thing. And that seems to have gotten worse.
Every
nowadays.
Generation feels that things have gotten worse. And I'm well aware of the danger of that kind of, middle-aged bias toward the present.
Yeah.
And I could instantly name 10 things about our day that are better than when I was young. You could start with gay marriage. You could move on to a black president. You could talk about, instant communications worldwide. You could go on to, heart medications and and surgical procedures, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of things that are better. What isn't better is the health of our society and the health of our social institutions. Individual lives in many cases have been improved, but the institutions that people rely on, especially when they don't have the resources themselves, have one by one become anemic, and that's a dangerous situation for a democracy.
Yeah. We're speaking with George Packer, the author of The Unwinding, an Inner History of the New America, here on americasdemocrats.org. Your book tells a number of individual stories of people who have lost out in the race to the top, and of filthy rich celebrities whose fame is based on their being famous. But overall, you're optimistic, aren't you?
I'm optimistic when I'm thinking about or hanging out with some of those people in the book. And to name a couple, Dean Price, who is a son of the tobacco region of North Carolina and who is a self-styled entrepreneur and has gone from being a truck stop owner to a biodiesel evangelist using canola and waste restaurant oil to make biodiesel fuels. And he's someone who is, out of sort of grit, imagination, and a dream that won't die. He has persisted against bankruptcies and the breakup of his business partnership and all sorts of setbacks, and he's still out there doing it. Another is Tammy Thomas, who is a Youngstown, Ohio woman who, in the midst of that city's collapse after the end of the steel industry, raised 3 children, sent them to college, held down a assembly line job, did what she was supposed to do, as she would say. And then when the assembly job was sent to Mexico, she remade herself as a community organizer, just in time for the first community organizer president. And these are stories that tell me that there's a tremendous amount of resourcefulness and reserve in Americans to come back from adversity and to reinvent themselves when older ways don't work. But when I think about the larger institutional forces, and when I think about Washington or Wall Street or even Silicon Valley, then I feel a little more pessimistic because I don't see those institutions creating the groundwork for broad prosperity. Every recovery from every recession, including especially the most recent, seems to leave the middle class worse off than before.
Mm-hmm. Before we let you go, how do we, as a nation, rewind?
I actually am going to do what you're not supposed to do on the air and say I don't have the answer, because my book, your listeners should know that this book is not a simple policy book that tells you the 10 ways to fix what's wrong with America. It is very much a narrative book that has a complicated structure with these stories of ordinary people who I've been describing, interwoven with portraits of the celebrities who shaped the era. And if I can give Americans a picture of themselves, how we are living today and how we got to this point, I feel like I've done something worthwhile. And there's a lot of room in the book for readers to then think and talk about what are the ways out of this dead end that we've come to.
If nothing else, it will generate conversation, I would hope, amongst folks that take the time to read it. George Packer, the name of the book is The Unwinding, an Inner History of the New America. George, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Sure, anytime.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Democratic pollster Celinda Lake says one of the problems the party faces is we tell the truth instead of constructing politically powerful message frames. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
America the beautiful, America the greatest. We're #1, right? Absolutely, naturally, and indisputably. At least, that's the theocratic pronouncement of far right-wing nativists who are presently putting forth a dogma of American exceptionalism, using the concept as a not-to-be-questioned litmus test of your and my patriotism. Never mind that on many crucial issues of national achievements, our good old U.S. of A. has slipped a bit in recent years, and a simple-minded assertion that we're number one doesn't make it so. For example, in the annual rate of educational improvement, a bedrock indicator of a nation's future ability to thrive, the U.S. has tumbled to 25th. Say it loud and say it proud, we're number 25. Not only does that place us behind such education powerhouses as Germany, but also behind Latvia, Portugal, and Slovenia. Yes, America remains one of the world's richest nations, yet our wealth is more concentrated in the hands of a rich elite than nearly every other nation. China has more democratic distribution of riches than our society does. So does Bangladesh, the Congo, Haiti, Mexico, Nigeria, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and all but 6 other countries. Healthcare, we're only 38th and dead last among wealthy democracies. Our tax code is the least progressive in the industrialized world. The quality of America's infrastructure ranks a poor 25th, and in a category that not long ago was a source of great national strength and pride, the wealth of our middle class has fallen below that of 26 other nations. This is Jim Hightower saying, in the past century, America became great not by merely believing in some hocus-pocus exceptionalism, but by achieving greatness through deliberate and determined public investments in the common good. And that's our path back to being number one.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you. The Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Democrats do a worse job than Republicans in creating powerful messages, according to Democratic pollster Celinda Lake. She says the party needs to focus on education, jobs, and Obamacare, and turn out in record numbers at the polls in 2014. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Celinda Lake is one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, serving as tactician and senior advisor to the National Party committees, dozens of Democratic incumbents, and challengers at all levels of the electoral process. She is one of the nation's foremost experts on electing women candidates and on framing issues to women voters. And Celinda Lake, welcome to americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
So what do Democrats have to do to keep control of the Senate in 2014 and the White House in 2016?
Well, the first thing that Democrats have to do is turn out to vote, and that is particularly true in 2014. In 2010, one of the biggest problems we had was that peripheral Democratic voters, young people, unmarried voters, Latino voters, showed very dramatic declines in turnout. And I say peripheral not in the sense that they're not important. They're extremely important. They're the margin of victory. But if the 2014 electorate is anything like the 2010 electorate, then we will lose. So let me give you 2 examples. If in 2012, 43% of the electorate was over 50. In 2010, it had been 53, and in some states it was as high as 57, 59% of the vote over 50. In 2012, Barack Obama lost voters over 50. So if the electorate in 2012 had been the same as the electorate in 2010, he would have lost the presidency. That's how critical this is. Some of the other biggest drop-off was with the unmarried women vote. And, of course, the Republican war on women really energized those voters, as well as good work by organizations like Women's Voices, Women's Vote. But we've got to see the same magnitude or more because we don't have Barack Obama on the ticket and we don't have the $1 billion that he was able to spend on Get Out the Vote.
Well, and speaking of women and Barack Obama not being there, pardon me, in 2016, is Hillary Clinton a shoo-in for the Democratic presidential nomination?
I think if she wants it, she is for sure. And I think women across the country are very, very excited about the possibility that she would run.
How do you square the importance to Democrats of the youth vote with the fact that the leading contenders for president, Hillary Clinton, as we mentioned, and Joe Biden will be near or over 70 years of age in 2016?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think the great thing about our young voters is that what they're most interested in is the policies that these two people have stood for their entire lives. Civil rights, abortion, and women's rights, getting an economy that works for everyone, education and children's education. So it's about agenda, not age, and these two have the agenda. But I think it's also very exciting that the youth vote has helped bring in a lot of young office holders to our party. And whether you're talking about people running for mayor or people running for governor, we have a lot of younger candidates, and it's very, very exciting.
And we're speaking with Celinda Lake, one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists here today on americasdemocrats.org. Now, compared to Republicans, where do Democrats go wrong in framing messages or using buzzwords that resonate with independents?
That is such a good question. Well, first of all, our biggest mistake is that we start talking right about the issue. We jump right into the policy. We don't do the framing. So they don't talk about the policy because they don't want to pass the policy. They talk about buzzwords. They frame their messages. And I think one of the things that we've been learning as a party is that we've got to frame our messages, and that you don't have 30 minutes to discuss the policy with voters. You have a 30-second soundbite, or more likely a 9-second soundbite, where you have to get your message across. So that's the first mistake we make. The second mistake, I might only a little facetiously say, is that we tell the truth. We all know that there are no death panels in the Affordable Care Act, but that never stopped Sarah Palin from talking about death panels, including recently in her messages on immigration. She was talking about the disaster of Obamacare and the deadly disaster of Obamacare. And then the third thing is, we think once we've said something once, that's enough. They repeat their messages.
Yeah, that may be an understatement. There you go. What issues are ripe for turning independents into Democrats?
First and foremost, the economy. And it is the message that we need to be talking about more, because we have the economic policies, whether it's making big corporations pay their fair share. And when you've got profitable corporations like GE and Verizon and Apple not paying any taxes or getting refunds from the government when they didn't pay any taxes, we need reform in our tax system. Jobs. And the very first thing we should be doing is ending the tax credit for jobs going overseas. But creating jobs in general and having a partnership with every aspect of government and our private sector to create more jobs. Education, everything from student loans to making higher education more affordable to avoiding the draconian cuts that are being done at the state level. Pennsylvania, for example, last week giving corporate tax breaks and proposing another, Corbett, the Republican governor of Pennsylvania, talking about another corporate tax break after already having given some, and he cut $1 billion from the schools. So these are vivid issues. Education and jobs, I think, the two strongest issues for us, and of course, selling and promoting the Affordable Care Act.
And again, we're talking with Celinda Lake, one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, here today on americasdemocrats.org. Now, something that's been in the news, of course, a lot lately, will continue to be for some time, I'm sure, Edward Snowden's case. You've said that his actions in releasing secret documents about domestic spying by the NSA resonate well among younger people in both liberal and libertarian camps. How does that play out moving forward?
Well, I think that Democrats have to be careful because there are a lot of hardcore constituencies that are very supportive of whistleblowing. And I think the other thing about this is while people want to maintain security, they don't want to give up their privacy and their freedoms to do it. So there needs to be a balancing act. And I think what's been revealed about the level of scrutiny of our private information is something that needs to be corrected. And I think what's interesting is that you have the IT sector, which is most dependent on young people, really starting to self-correct and talk about the fact that they're going to report to their consumers on a monthly or quarterly basis what they're doing. That's a sign that this is a potent issue, particularly young people. And I think you've seen already the voice of young people in our party and our radio sectors, our blogger sectors, moving and correcting the statements of some of the politicians and making them appreciate that this is really a more complicated issue about our freedoms. That said, I also think this is an interesting issue because it does unite these libertarian voters and our liberal voters, and you see some very interesting politicians being very, very strong on this issue who come from more Western states. So you have Senator Mark Begich, who was actually talking about security and that too much of our records were being looked at long before Stone revealed the true magnitude of the problem. And John Tester, who actually led his state legislature and got half of the Republicans when he was president of the Senate to be against the Patriot Act because he thought it went too far in invading our privacy. So there's a tradition, I think, among our Western office holders that this really taps into. And they have been talking about this for a while.
Okay. Celinda Lake, one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Celinda, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California.
So good to have you with us this morning, and so happy to welcome back into the studio a good friend from California, doing a great job representing the people of the Oakland area in the United States Congress, Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Hey, Congresswoman, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
All right. But California's booming, huh? Yeah. Jerry Brown's brought it back.
For some.
For some, that's true.
For some.
Yeah.
My district still has high rates of unemployment, high rates of poverty. A lot of people who have been hit by the foreclosure crisis are still, recovering from that. So we have many, many challenges.
Do you see impacts of the sequester, too, in your...
Absolutely. When you look at our county services, when you look at furloughs, when you look at what's taking place with regard to public services, people are having a hard time. We're doing fairly well in beginning to roll out the Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. But, cuts to HIV and AIDS programs, and my district, of course, has one of the highest rates in the country. Yeah. All of that is a result of sequester, the loss of jobs.
Yeah, and you know what? Nobody's talking about it anymore, and we should be. We should be. So the Congresswoman's here for this first half hour with our team, Peter Rockburn and Dan Henning. Hello, guys.
Hey. Good morning.
Alicia Cruz has the phones covered, and Cyprian Bolding is off this week. Monty Chancellor here, keeping us looking good on Current TV. Congresswoman, before we get to the issues of the day, you just wonder if there's any if there's any limit to how low sometimes these conservatives will go in their attacks on this president and his administration, and then every time you think they've gone about as low as they can go, they surprise you, right? So here yesterday on his syndicated show, Glenn Beck, used to be on Fox. Now he's got his, national. What that's pay for.
He's on radio.
Pay for view. No,
this is from his radio broadcast.
He's on radio. Yeah, The Blaze is
right.
the TV network.
Who's raising questions about Secretary of State John Kerry and his wife, who was taken seriously ill this week and flown to a hospital in Boston. And Glenn Beck wonders whether she might have been faking it.
Our Secretary of State, is he on his boat while the Egyptian uprising is going on? Instead of telling you the truth, they say, no, he's definitely not on his boat. That's an outrage to even ask that. Okay? And you expect me to believe that Mrs. Ketchup is in critical condition? I mean, no offense. Maybe she is.
What do you got to do with these people? Remember, they thought that Hillary Clinton faked her brain tumor.
Yeah, it's a level of cynicism and meanness that we've never seen before. And I hope the public really gets it and understands that this is probably, and I always say it reminds folks of what Senator Mitch McConnell said in terms of their first priority was to make sure that President Obama was a one-term president. Well, he won again. Big. So now their priority, of course, is to make sure that he fails in everything he does. And if they have to go after whomever on a personal basis during such a very sad period, they'll do it. They'll do anything in the world.
I mean, there's a reason why Senator John Kerry was, Secretary of State now, right, was not at the State Department the last couple of days. His wife had a very serious illness on Nantucket or the Vineyard, whichever.
I think it was Nantucket.
Nantucket, and they got her stabilized there in the small health center, more serious than they could handle. She was medevaced to Boston. He's at her side. I mean, Jesus.
If the right wing really believes in family values, then this is really a terrible example of their values.
Unbelievable. Now, on the issues of the day, I thought of you yesterday when I read that President Obama is now saying, when we look at Afghanistan, the original plan was we're going to be out of there next year, except we were going to leave a residual group of forces in Afghanistan to help the government of Hamid Karzai. Reportedly now, Congresswoman, the administration is considering something that you've been asking for a long time, is just get everybody, all of our troops, the hell out of Afghanistan. That's not leaving anybody there.
We shouldn't. That's what he should do. I mean, we need to, of course, look at how we engaged in a diplomatic initiative in the region and what we need to do to, I believe, help, in terms of making sure that women's rights are protected. So there's, I think, a non-military role as we have in other parts of the world. But for years now, of course, I couldn't vote for it initially in 2001 because I knew then that this was that resolution that allowed for the military operation in not only Afghanistan, but 30-some other places in the world in terms of it's been used 30-some times, that this could be a resolution that would go, which would allow a war without end everywhere. So I'm glad to hear the administration is moving in this direction because there is no military solution. We don't need to leave a residual force. That's going to cost millions, probably billions of dollars. We need to begin to nation build here at home. And I'm glad to hear that the president is beginning to consider that.
Was it 2001, that vote?
It was 2001. It was after the horrific events.
You were the only vote, weren't you, against the war in Afghanistan?
September 14th, and it was a terrible time for the country, of course.
You took a lot of flack for that. Do you any regrets?
That was the right vote, Bill. It was a tough vote, but when you read that resolution, it said the president's authorized to use force against any nation, organization, individual connected to 9/11. It was a total blank check, and it's been used everywhere around the world, including as legal justification for the use of drones. We need to repeal it. I have legislation to repeal it, and hopefully now the Congress will figure out there was never really a debate on it. It took the Congress out of its role in terms of our decision-making power to declare war or not. And so we need to go back and fix this.
And everybody now points to that use of for the use of force. Congress approved it. Congress approves it. And we're just operating according to what Congress has done, right?
Yeah, and that doesn't make any sense. That's in perpetuity. That's forever.
Yeah. It's you and Russ Feingold. Russ Feingold, the only one to vote against the Patriot Act.
In the Senate. I think first time in the House, from what I remember, we had 66 no votes.
Did you really?
In the House against
the Senate,
the Patriot Act.
He was the first one. And you were the only one in the Senate, and you were the only one in the House on this resolution. So look at Afghanistan, and now I think the president's coming to this point because he's just frustrated with the Hamid Karzai. And so what have we gained in Afghanistan after all these years, all this money, and all this loss of life?
Well, first, we have to remember that we have lost many of our young men and women. Many are injured and have disabilities for life. And so part of what we have to do now is make sure that their disability claims, which is something we're working on, are expedited and that they receive the type of benefits that they deserve and their economic security. I mean, that's the first priority. But when you look at what has taken place now in Afghanistan and with Karzai, when you look at the type of the billions of dollars that have been ripped off, in suitcases, cash money, that's been lost. I mean, come on, what have we gained?
A lot of
the region is not stable.
Yeah.
The corruption is rampant. The Taliban is there. When you look at it, we unfortunately need to figure out a way to engage more in a diplomatic initiative, recognizing that in terms of inserting American troops in Afghanistan just won't work. It has not worked, and it won't work in the future. And we have the history of of the Soviet involvement and other involvement in Afghanistan to prove that.
Right. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, our guest here in studio on the Full Court Press. Congresswoman, you were there yesterday at the White House for the meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus and President Obama. Tell us about the meeting. Good terms. What did you talk about?
Sure. It was a very good meeting. Of course, our chair, Congresswoman Marcia Fudge from Ohio, really is a wonderful, great leader. And she, of course, along with President Obama, co-chaired the meeting. We talked about many issues that are of extreme importance to the Congressional Black Caucus, the African American community, communities of color, but also to our entire country. We talked about immigration reform and why it's so important to have comprehensive immigration reform, and that we cannot leave any immigrant group out, including those from the Caribbean and from Africa. Extremely important. We also talked about poverty. That's a priority of the Congressional Black Caucus in terms of the elimination of poverty. When you look at what has taken place beginning under the Bush administration, you have poverty rates now that are soaring. 16, 17 million children living in poverty in the wealthiest and most powerful country in the world. So as a priority of the Congressional Black Caucus, again, as I co-chair the task force on poverty and economic opportunity, we talked about pathways out of poverty and what we're going to do legislatively. We also talked about the Voting Rights Act and how we have to make sure that everyone has the right to vote. That's that's the essence of democracy. And of course, with the Supreme Court decision, we've got to figure out a legislative strategy to make sure we, in essence, reverse that. We talked about that, and it was a very good, substantive meeting.
Reportedly, you also talked about gun safety.
Yes, we talked about gun
certainly
safety.
An issue that you deal with all the time in Oakland. Did you get the sense the president is frustrated that everything seems to have stalled on gun safety, and is he determined to keep going?
He's determined to keep going. The Congressional Black Caucus is determined to keep going. When you look at what has happened, say, for instance, last week in Chicago, 60-some deaths? When you look at my own district in Oakland, every day, young people getting killed. When you look at areas around the country, each and every day we're losing young men and women, young kids. And it's a shame and disgrace that we cannot get members of Congress to understand that minimally we should have background checks. We should have restriction on the number of the magazine count restriction. We should have just basic gun safety measures. And the president's fully supportive. He has not given up. The Congressional Black Caucus is going to continue to fight until we get these weapons off the streets.
California's got some of the toughest laws in the nation, an assault weapons ban in California. Has it made a difference in California?
It's made some difference, but when you don't have national standards and when you have the ability to transport weapons and
from one
state to the other, your state laws are going to be minimal at best. Again, look at my district in Oakland. Let's look at what's taking place there, and we have assault weapons everywhere, and young people are dying each and every day.
You mentioned immigration reform. The Senate passed its bill for what it's worth. I think the provisions of it I don't like, but at any rate, they've moved on that legislation. Now it's in the House. The House Republicans can't seem to make up their mind what they're going to do, so they're caucusing today to discuss what their approach is going to be to immigration reform. Do you have any hope that a bill is going to get out to the president's desk?
Bill, as a public official, I have to have hope. Keep hope alive.
I know. You've been at it a long time.
A long time. I've been here 15 years now, and let me tell you, you can't give up. You have to keep fighting. And so, hopefully, the Republicans, at least enough Republicans, will begin to see why this is, first of all, the right thing to do. Secondly, is beneficial to our economy. We've seen the reports with regard to what the economic benefits are of comprehensive immigration reform. We're a country of immigrants. This is something we should not even have to struggle through. And, the Senate, to their credit, passed a bill. There are provisions that I do not like. Hopefully we can get a decent House bill passed and go to conference, because too many people have waited too long for this.
Yeah, indeed. And then there's the stall on the farm bill as well. So now they're thinking about, well, maybe we can get a farm bill passed if we just take food stamps out of it at all. What you said about poverty, this relates to that. We'll get into that when we come back and take a quick break. The Congresswoman is here. Glad to take your calls at 866-55-PRESS as we talk about some of the challenges facing this Congress. The biggest challenge is getting anything done with this gang of Republicans. But your call's welcome. 866-55-PRESS. We'll be right back.
On your radio and on Current TV, this is The Bill Press Show.
All right, 25 minutes after the hour here, Blake Hounshell's the deputy editor of Politico, a magazine, covering the news of the day with us for the next half hour here on the Full Court Press. But right now we're privileged to have in studio with us a good friend from California, Congresswoman Barbara Lee from Oakland, California. Peter?
Bill on social media, on Twitter, at BP Show is where you can find us and join our conversation. Pat says, Bill ranting about Barack Obama and broccoli is silly. Well, it might not be my favorite food. It is my favorite vegetable, and I eat it more than any other food. So there.
All right. Broccoli lovers unite. All I'm saying is, I'll bet you the president never went out to a restaurant and said, I want some broccoli. I'm here to get some broccoli.
How's the broccoli here?
I think we all accept broccoli, but we don't love it anyhow. Yeah. Congressman, I want to ask you about this, the farm bill. Now, I remember that old ad, that radio commercial in the San Francisco Bay, cows in Berkeley, right? Remember that?
Berkeley Farms.
Berkeley Farms.
District.
It is in your district.
That's right.
But there's not many farms in Oakland, but still, this farm bill's important, isn't it?
It's very important. And interestingly, I was on the Ag Committee when I was in the California legislature.
Oh.
And part of my work was bringing more rural issues into urban areas, so young people especially could understand where milk came from cows. And so we brought cows to the schools in Berkeley.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But I think this ag bill that we defeated, rightfully so, was a terrible bill. And now it's my understanding the Republican leadership are going to bifurcate. They're going to separate out the nutrition section from the farm subsidy. It's just totally outrageous, Bill.
Which is one of the most important parts of it, right? So the whole food stamp program, they just want to get rid of.
They want to get rid of it. And, I was very proud of the 29 members of Congress that took the food stamp challenge. We lived off of a food stamp allocation of about $4.50 a day for some of us 7 days. And it was just really quite amazing how we were able to let the public know what exactly was at stake. And it took a lot. But members of Congress came forward, talked about the unhealthy diet that people who are on food stamps and SNAP, have, and why we don't need to cut that, but why we need to actually increase the allocation. And, so many people are eligible, aren't even on it. People deserve this bridge over troubled waters. No one wants to be on SNAP or food stamps. I mean, I'm a former public assistance recipient, and I was on food stamps way back in the day, in the 70s. I never could have raised my children as a single mom and gotten out of school had it not been for that helping hand that I needed at that very difficult period of time. That's the way most people are who are on SNAP benefits.
Something that you and I have struggled with, and I guess we'll never figure out, is why of all the targets, that Republicans could choose to pick on, right? They always choose the poorest of the poor, right? And the
poor,
people who need
our
help
seniors, the most vulnerable. This is a terrible moment, I think, in our country's history where it's survival of the fittest. Go for what you know. Only the strong survive.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. George Packer, Celinda Lake, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to